When I joined the company, we had just built our MVP and we were selling it. Things were going well. And about 3 months in, we kind of hit a wall. And we were thinking, why is this happening? We had built this really great data product for hedge funds, and they were ingesting it through APIs, and we're thinking, what's going wrong? It turns out that our customer base was much less technical than we had intended. So we had been giving them API and all this data, and we kind of hit a wall with customers who knew how to use that. So very quickly, we had to figure out why we were hitting that wall, be honest with ourselves, and then we introduced an Excel add-in, as well as like a customizable UI for people to use as a less technical way of accessing our product. So that was us deciding to pivot in a way that, we had to use like humility and honesty with our team. It also meant that our team had to build a less technical product, which they weren't super excited about, but they understood the point of it after we kind of explained the market. This was super different than my experience at Bloomberg, where it was a much more mature product. And basically all the changes were incremental instead of like on the fly. So we noticed that there's definitely pros and cons to this. On one hand, a mature product that moves incrementally is done with intention and you don't have those kind of surprises. But with a product that comes from like a few customers, you definitely see those pivots happen like in the moment, and you just have to be open and ready for it. The second thing I wanted to talk about was listening to your customers. So kind of building on this pivot point, we chose some early customers who were our partners and helped us build a product that made sense for the market. So even though we built it initially like more technically, we trusted their judgment, and on a lot of points, like the core data itself, it proved to be meaningful for our customer base. So after we saw that, we decided to go to other early customers who had a very different set of skills, and they helped us build our product throughout the rest of the roadmap for the year. Yeah. So are there any questions so far? Or Celeste, you said we're going to do them at the end.
Yes, we're doing them at the end.
Okay. So the first two customers that we chose were these two hedge funds, one that I had actually worked at and another that was a close partner. They were much smaller than like a lot of the hedge funds that we work with now. So over time, we had to expand our offering to match those other customers that came later on. And we chose them as early partners for our new project, like later down the line. That was something I didn't realize coming from Bloomberg, that you have to like always be iterating with your customers and keeping a direct line of communication, because they're going to be the ones that tell you, even if it's indirectly, if your product makes sense or not. And I think the final thing I wanted to talk about is you don't know what you don't know. And this has been the most meaningful point for me, something that I think we learn over and over again and probably will never stop learning. So when we entered the energy space, we realized that a lot of our competitors had been telling people that they were doing what we were doing. So just some quick background on SynMax. We take satellite images of ships and also of energy assets, and we use that to provide analytics to different groups like governments and hedge funds. So we were giving people the ground truth. We could show them a satellite image and they could understand exactly what we were showing in our analytics. But what our competitors were doing is they were taking model results and passing it off as the same because they had never needed to compete at that like level. So we had to go into the space and redefine what it meant to be ground truth, because a lot of people had been saying it before. And that wasn't something we were necessarily prepared for. So we didn't know that the market like kind of had been lied to. And so we've had to educate people in a way that wasn't an expectation at the like initial point. The other thing is that we had to learn to stick to the fundamentals of our product and our company ethics. So a few weeks ago, actually, we were planning to launch this new product and it didn't work out, which is actually still really difficult to say. We're figuring out next steps for it, but we kind of evaluated it and realized it it didn't have the standard of rigor that we expect for a product when we launch. So we decided like, we're not going to do it. And we had put all this development hours, marketing into it. And we decided it doesn't make sense for us to release a product that doesn't absolutely fit with our company like standards and with what we feel comfortable selling to people. Alongside of that, we realized how important credibility is when you're building a product. So when people trust your data for truth, you can't give them anything less than that. So even though it was difficult and it was expensive in certain ways, it was definitely the right decision for us. And so now we're trying to pivot and figure out the right next steps so we can continue to provide an amazing like product for our customers going forward. And I think the last thing, which has come more from the sales product perspective, is like, don't be afraid of rejection and failure. So every time we failed or had a product kind of launch that didn't go exactly as planned, we've learned probably more than when the product went super well. And I think that it's taught me to be like really honest about where my weak points are, not only as a leader, but also as like a team member and developer of an idea. So we have to always be like testing ourselves in a way that makes sense, because the market isn't going to lie. And when you put a product out there, people will tell you really quickly if it makes sense or not. So yeah, you can never be afraid of rejection or failure when you're putting a product out there. Yeah, Celeste, I feel like I went kind of fast, but those were my.
No, you were right on time.
Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Kristen? Feel free to unmute and say it aloud or type in the chat.
Well, someone left the meeting, so it must have been that informative that didn't even have to ask.
Oh no. Does anyone have any questions? All right, if not, you can always leave it in the chat. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Once you have defined an MVP and you're testing your product in the market, how do you define subsequent releases or content for your product?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I guess there's always like, there's a difference between like a new product release and then product updates. So yeah, thanks Hema for asking that. So over time, I think we have a little bit of like give because we're a startup. So if we notice some like really glaring product issues, we would release those updates, send an email to our clients and just kind of like keep going. But we're doing like an overhaul on our UI right now, and we're going to release a like brand new UI that kind of combines a bunch of our different products as one. And that's how we are defining like a new product release. So I think it's like, I guess it's like bug fixes and all of the kind of small changes we do as updates. And then kind of the thematic changes to the product itself are when we're like, yeah, that's when it makes sense to do a Hyperion 2.0, which is what we released in January this year. Yeah, thank you for asking.
I think having smaller releases would have helped you iterate over the customer's feedback when you put out the MVP.
Yeah. So you're saying like, yeah, so like for instance, in October, we did a 1.5 release where it was kind of like we did a beta release of our latest product to help them kind of like try it out and find all of the bugs. Like I say, anything super glaring, we're like, okay, let's just fix that today. But then, for instance, one of the features that our customers really wanted was to be able to share their like analytics page with other people at their company. So we decided to wait until the like bigger product release to send that one through, because we're like, that's a meaningful change that like really matters and we can wait on it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Excellent. I think we have time for one more question. All right. If not, as I said, you can always ping in the chat, even if it's past the 5-minute Q&A, we get answered. All right. So next on deck is Melissa Benua. Thank you so much, Kristen, for that great talk. Melissa, am I saying your name correctly?
Pretty close. It's Benua.
Benua. All right. Melissa Benua, and I'll let you take it away.
All right. Let me share a screen here. Just a second. Think it's working. Maybe. Okay. Think we're good. Yes?
I can see it.
All right. So, hello, everybody. I am Melissa, and I'm going to tell you a story. And I promise you the story has something to do with leadership, even though it may not sound like it at first. So the story is about one time, once, maybe ever, one time that I was wrong about something. It involves me and my husband many, many years ago, even before he was my husband. And we were, getting to know each other, and we were out on a date. We were talking about, things that you talk like you do, things when you were a kid, especially movies. He's a big movie fan. He's a big comedian fan. And so we got to talking about 90s movies, and he said, oh, I really remember that 90s movie? It had a genie. I think it was Shaq. Shaq was in it, and it was Kazam. And I said, yeah, but actually, I'm pretty sure you meant Shazam with Sinbad. And he said, no, I really, really liked comedians from the 90s, and I definitely would have remembered if Sinbad did a movie. I'm sure that it was Shaq and Kazam. So we went back and forth a few times. He's like, it's Shaq. No, Sinbad. And then, as you do, we grabbed our phones and we raced to IMDb because the first person to get to IMDb wins. And lo and behold, it was, in fact, the mid-90s movie Kazam, which now there is a Shazam, but it was the mid-90s movies Kazam, and it did, in fact, star Shaquille O'Neal. Oh, I've got slides, and I forgot about them. Was Shaq, right? Shaq was there. So at that point, he looked at me, and he said, ha, 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 ha. And I was like, whoa. And he said, finally, for once, I'm right, and you're wrong. And I was like, okay, dude, I guess, and I did marry this man. I was like, okay, dude, but what do you mean for once? And he said, well, you usually think you're right when we're talking about things. And honestly, you usually are right when you talk about things. And you work this big company job, like you're at tech companies and you've got all these cool titles and you're in charge of all this cool stuff. So you must really be right all day long, all the time. And I said, but you don't. So my husband is great. He's a program manager. He works at Microsoft now. But the most important thing is he's not an engineer. He doesn't come from an engineering background. He doesn't have an engineering mindset. And I had to say to him, it's great that you think that, dude. And I'm glad that you have this impression of me. But I'm wrong all the time, constantly, every day, every hour of the day. That's my job as an engineer, right? My job is to be wrong. Over and over and over again. My job is to take risks, to try new things, to make mistakes, to learn from them. I'm wrong in exciting, new, and ridiculous ways every day. So, all of the errors you make, all the little ones, the stupid things like, whoops, I forgot to close off my string and now my compiler is barfing at me. Making all these small mistakes and having to say, whoops, sorry, you're right. Let me edit my PR. Totally got this. I'm going to fix this. No worries. Have led to me being able to take these little things and synthesizing into being comfortable when the crap really hits the fan and something goes really badly amok, right? The feeling you get when you make a typo or you forgot to close your string out in your IDE is the teeny tiny baby precursor to the one you get when you ship your code to production, and then this happens. And I know that we're virtual, and I know that, hopefully some of you have run some live services before, and you get that, ooh, that intrinsic, when you see a picture like this, right? But it happens. Things go bad. We ship bad changes. We make a misconfiguration. We bring in this cool USB drive we found outside because it might have some Bitcoins on it. We plug it in, and bad things happen. But when things go bad, right, we don't have time to panic or blame or point fingers, right? We have to triage. We have to identify the problem. We have to stop the bleeding. We have to patch a fix as quickly and calmly and thoroughly as possible, right? I'm speaking from experience, right? I'm an engineer. We like to say at Imparticle that you're not really a senior engineer until you've broken something super bad in production by accident. The same way we say you're not really a leader unless you've coached your team through the same thing. And so I, learned this dichotomy really young. So a couple of years back, I was, much younger software developer working at this really, really big company on a really large web scale service that handled like 1 million requests per second. And it was high profile. There was a lot of money. And I worked at the top of our serving stack, which was responsible for basically all the traffic that went pretty much anywhere. I'm sure you can imagine what it is. I'm not going to give any hints. But I was on call back before we had words for DevOps and rotations. I was on call for my service. And one night, while me and my manager and a few people were left in the office, we found a crashing issue. Turns out that if you shipped a certain configuration change, the service will crash. So he and I looked at each other and we said, ooh, we're just not going to touch this. We're not going to patch anything. And in the morning, we'll fix it. And it'll just be fine. And it was definitely not fine. The plan was fine. We forgot to sell some other people on the team. We went to bed feeling great. We woke up in the morning to the pager trying to set itself on fire. Somebody, it turns out, had gone and triggered the config change that caused the crashing service while I was sleeping, and it was bad. And so it was broken at 8 a.m. on the first day of a huge marketing push, big campaign going out, and the webpage looked like this. So was I sleepy? Yeah. And groggy and scared and what the heck is happening to me? Of course. But because I've had all this training in making little mistakes and slightly bigger mistakes and slightly bigger mistakes, I knew what to do, right? I acknowledged that something went crazy wrong and it was my fault. I figured out what exactly went crazy wrong. I stopped the bleeding, right? I patched the thing that was wrong. And then we did a retro. We learned from my mistake and how it happened. And we patched the entire class of mistakes so that nobody could do the same thing again. And, right, it was bad. It was my $1 million outage. It was $1 million. But we learned from it. And because I wasn't just me, right, who'd mastered this art of being wrong, but everybody on my team, up to including my manager. He had built an environment where the entire team, including myself, felt safe to make a mistake and to learn and to move forward, right? Nobody was fired. Nobody was flogged, but the team never made that particular mistake again. We made lots of new ones, but we never made that one again, right? We patched the hole that had allowed it to happen. And so this formed the foundation of how I think about leadership today, right? I need my teams to be able to try new things. They need to be able to take risks. I don't want to babysit them all day. They don't want me hovering over their shoulders, watching every keystroke they make. So in order for them to do their jobs, I have to make it safe for them to make mistakes, to build resilience, and not just in our services, but psychologically, right? Nobody's going to do their best work. Nobody can learn. Nobody can grow if they're paralyzed with fear of being fired if they put a foot out of line. So I promised you it was about leadership. It's about leadership. If there's any one thing I want you to take away from this is to be okay being wrong. Embrace it. Let your teams make mistakes just like you make mistakes. Let them learn from them just like you learn from them. Own them. Build that resilience, because being wrong isn't the end of the world, right? It's just another day in the life of an engineer.
Excellent. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you?
I'm good.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Did I jump ahead of you?
You didn't.
I'm sorry.
You didn't. You're perfect.
All right. That was excellent. And again, open it up to questions, but I'd like to ask the first one.
Go for it.
Have you ever worked with someone or had a manager who could not be wrong, or had a really hard time dealing with being wrong? And what was that like?
Oh yeah, many, many times. And now I'm at the point in my career where I don't put up with that. If I think that somebody is in charge of me and somebody can't be told when they're wrong, they won't be in charge of me for very long. But before I had some of those choices, and you don't always have that choice. It's important to understand where they're coming from and to try to make it less about them being personally wrong than trying to give them additional context so that they can make a better decision, right? So you can guide them to your point of view. There's nothing you can do that's going to fix a jerk, but I find that people, if they're not jerks, may be amenable if you don't make it about them personally, right? It's about the system. It's about the environment overall, and you're just giving them more data so that they can form a new conclusion.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think we have a question in the chat here.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Zach. How do I build a culture of trust and resiliency every day? So first and foremost, it's really important to build a culture where you make a mistake and we celebrate it. We had an engineer who was not quite a senior engineer, but close, and he made a horrific mistake in production. He basically dropped tables on our production database, the whole thing, overwrote most of the columns. But his response, like we gave him space to own it. So his response was impeccable, right? He owned it, he put a fix, and then as a part of the retro, he patched, like he closed off this vulnerability. You can't make this mistake anymore. And to show, like, as a part of building his culture, we promoted him. And we told him a big part of your promotion was this mistake you made and your recovery from it. Like, we were very, very, very clear with him about it, right? It's not even that he got punished, but look, yeah, great, you made a mistake. It's great, you've made everybody better by making this mistake because any one of us could have done it. So that's, a big example, but we live that in small examples every single day, right? It's totally fine to make a mistake. What's not fine is to make the same mistake over and over again, right? And we draw a very clear differentiator in the teams and in the behavior and in the retro of let's work together. Let's find this thing. We had another team that we built a skill with, and they were working on a project, and the project came down from an exec member who said, hey, I'm working with this other startup. We've got this service. We think it's going to be great. We want you to implement it. We think it's going to save a lot of money. And the team tried to implement, and they tried, and eventually they said to the executive, right, because they'd had all this practice with resilience, and they said to him, we don't think this is going to work. We get that you sponsoring this thing. It looks really cool. We don't think it's going to work. Here's the reasons why, and here's what we're going to give you instead. And likewise, the executive said, you know what? I think I was wrong on this, right? He set the example. I think I was wrong. I think I made a mistake. I'm going to trust you guys and let you run with it. And the team was right? They nailed that project in half the time that we thought it would be in the way they wanted to do it. So, we reward small instances of developers being wrong, but learning. We set the example from the top down of owning your mistakes and making it clear, right? He didn't fire himself. And he rewarded the team for called him on the mistake, because that's sometimes just as important is having people willing to speak up to you as you are to hear the feedback. And no, I didn't watch Kazam. I got no patience for those movies. None.
Any more questions for Melissa? About one quick question left. All right, again, feel free to still ask in the chat. Melissa, that was extremely powerful. I love the idea that you can't grow stronger unless something is broken at some point to learn. That's really great. All right, last but not least, Hema. Am I saying your name correctly?
It's Hema.
Hema, all right, well, 2 for 2. All right, Hema, go ahead and share. Take it away.
Okay. Yes, I'm going to have a slideshow like Melissa did. Okay. There you go. Figured out how to do a slideshow. Okay. I'm going to talk about productivity. We often talk about productivity, and more often than not, we always say individual productivity or people, we need to make people productive. We're going to give them tools to be productive and things like that. And as a engineering leader, I wanted to, share my thoughts around, is it really your people or is it your system? It goes back to what Melissa was talking about. As a leader, you own what you put in place for your teams. So simple definition, what's productivity? It's basically the ratio of outputs to inputs. And like any software business, the goal is to get more outputs for, and the way you get that is, keeping the input same or less. It's just very, very mathematical. And today I'll just focus on, this whole topic about individual productivity or team productivity or department productivity. And I'm here to basically argue that we need to focus on improving the system and not so much the people. Definitions: people are individuals who actually do the work. Systems is whatever you set up in the form of policies, procedures, tools, to run your department and your team. That's what I define as system. For the sake of simplicity, I will just say that every company, every team, every department, let's assume that we hired the right people with the right skill set and the aptitude. And let's just go down the list to see how well, as leaders, we are setting up the system. Let's talk process first. This is just something that, as leaders, we are responsible for putting in a process where you actually start with trust. You trust your team, empower them, make them autonomous, and also be growth mindset. That's exactly what Melissa also touched upon. You just allow, the psychological safety and the space for your team to grow, make mistakes, learn, and then grow. Have a very well-defined roles and responsibility, and just publish them so everybody's aware of what somebody's role is and what they're responsible for. Establish clear communication channels, and even how to escalate a problem, and allow the teams to make micro decisions, and also unblock themselves. Don't be do unnecessary gatekeeping. You've hired smart people, so give them the tools, set up a guardrail, set up procedures, and as much as possible, get out of the way and watch them do amazing things. Again, be cautious about too much process, too little process. Both are productivity hindrances. So going back to what Kristen said, as your startup, just have fewer processes and then iterate over time as you grow. So that's what I would say. And then, if you don't have a process set up in your system, that would cause unnecessary bottlenecks. So that's kind of how you would see the system. I call it platform because I've already used the word system to define the whole process. Here, we often talk about customer happiness, right? But we ignore, developer happiness. So what I'm really saying here is you have to create a system where developer happiness is as important as your customer happiness. End of the day, they are the ones delivering things. Make it a priority in your roadmap. That's how you, navigate the system to allocate time and have conversations with the senior exec and leadership to make time to make it better and easier for the developers. Give them the right tools. I've been in large companies, I've been in small companies. Everybody tend to penny pinch on, giving them like $20 tools, not realizing that engineers are your highest paid in your accounting system. So just make sure that you give them the right productivity tools. If they want a license for Python, give it to them. The payback is, tremendously high. And then even other tools that you use, like for example, Jira, turn on those bells and whistles. If you want, initiatives in Jira, if you want GitOps in GitHub, turn on those tools for the teams to try, innovate, and also make their lives much easier. So I would say that not having productivity tools is actually creating toil, and you're actually, not allowing the individuals to be productive. The last one that I wanted to touch upon is policies and procedures. This actually gets to the senior leadership at the department level and at the company level. Just set up a merit-based organization, a culture that is based on merit. Referrals are great, exceptional, but allow every referral to stand on their own feet. And then, oftentimes engineering leaders who have not typically, grown from within the organization, they kind of bring all these metrics to measure outcomes, not activities. So that's another thing that you can do to get your system to help your team members to be productive. I would say reward the right behavior. When Melissa was saying, if somebody made a mistake, you promoted them. That's kind of what you look for. You reward the right behavior. Another example that I would give is, don't reward people who jump in and push changes fast. Reward people who take the time and get it right, because the short-term, long-term, mid-term benefits are very high. The other thing as a culture is make it transparent. Just publish the projects, publish the work that is available, and so unnecessary gatekeeping is also not good. One thing that I also wanted to call out here is, when this also ties a little bit around rewarding the right behavior, but I'm particularly sensitive to recognizing people who do unglamorous work. These are people who go the extra mile to do automation. These are people who pull things together and deliver it holistically, and not say, oh, I did coding, everything else is somebody else's problem. So, watch for these people and recognize and reward them, because these are seen as unglamorous. People who code and publish push changes and things like that, they are recognized as superstars in our tech industry. The next one that I have is quiet time. Respect, institute quiet time and respect that, and also respect work-life balance. Don't, if something can wait on a Monday, wait, take that rest, right? So these are all simple, subtle things, but it goes at the highest level, right? And then another culture trait that I always recommend is, pay attention to the people who are quiet, the quieter ones, because they have a lot more. They have spent a lot more energy on observing rather than talking. So they are very powerful in their insights. So, go out of your way to pay attention to them. And then honestly, and in a very demonstrative way, invest in the growth of your people. So this defines your culture, a system that is fair and transparent. And as much as you say, do some sneaky things, people are not stupid. They will see through you right away. So it's always in the best interest that you create a system that is fair and transparent. In conclusion, I want to say a good system can elevate everyone. A bad system can make even the most capable and talented individual unproductive. So I would say focus on continuously improving your system. So that's what I wanted to share today.
Thank you so much, Hema. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, actually. So you talked about having a merit-based culture, but then you also touched on when you have quiet individuals, making sure you speak with them. So one of my questions for you is, how do you recognize, because people can be quiet in different ways, right? Like you can be outgoing, yes, but you can be very modest about your work. And so one thing that we've noticed over time is that you'll have really star performers who are doing a lot of the unglamorous work, but maybe not flagging it in a stand-up. So how do you find ways of measuring merit without necessarily implementing really strict metrics, because everyone's work looks different?
Yes, this is actually a great question, and it's a question that is very deep. So I'll take a few minutes to give examples here. So merit-based means you focus on the actions and you focus on work delivered. So that is what merit-based means. So, and paying attention to the quieter ones. This is where I'm a senior leader, so I have first-line managers. So I rely on them to identify, because they are in the day-to-day. And I have like a 360 review process where I have markers and feedback from multiple sources. So from a stand-up, it could be a product owner, it could be a project manager, it could be a scrum master, and work delivered is how much the work has been impactful, how the quality of the work, and also how are they uplifting their team, sharing and things like that. So there are, I wouldn't say metrics, but there are ways that you can measure impact, and it's actually 360 view of this work. In terms of quiet, I proactively reach out to the people who are quiet. One-on-ones are great opportunities that you spend time one-on-one with them. Pull up your sleeve and just immerse yourself in a project with your teams in different stages. You get to see who are quiet, but they're also doing work to make the team productive, and you can actually identify people who are a little bit self-centered and watching out for themselves. So the dynamics is very visible, both during one-on-one conversations as well as pulling up your sleeve and huddling with them. And then lastly, when I said proactively pay attention to the quiet ones, is in discussions, architectural meetings, design meetings, the quiet ones tend to stay quiet. As a leader, you actually say, hey, Kristen, what do you think about this? So make that effort to call out and seek that input, because you already have pegged people who are quiet and introverts. So giving them the forum to speak is a way that you can determine that. A lot of times the loud ones, they kind of tend to hog the limelight, but as a leader, you just have to make an explicit effort to create quiet time and awkward quiet moments, and then say, hey, what do you think about this? And try to create a culture that everybody follows through. So it's a very, there's no one solution fits all, but it's very situational, and it's based on your team composition. If everybody's quiet, then you call out everybody, but if you have a mix, then you just have to be very intentional about amplifying the voices of quiet ones.
So when you talk about, sorry, is it okay if I just have a follow-up?
Yes.
Okay. So when you talk about like 360-degree feedback, one of the things that we've tried to implement is asking people who are your biggest collaborators, to try and build out like a web of who's helping out people that you don't necessarily see. Are there any other like methods that you would recommend that might have like a similar way of gauging that like qualitative work?
Yes. I think when you ask who are your best collaborators, I think you also have to define what collaboration means in this case. From an engineering perspective, somebody who just, creates the problem and then jumps and fixes it are heroes. And, so, but from the outside, they look like collaborators. Oh, they're available all the time. They're fixing the problems and things like that, right? But from an engineering perspective, what I at least look for is somebody who is collaborative, but also teaching you in engineering excellence down the way. They're saying, hey, you know what, I can really fix this problem, but why don't I take a week and then fix it right, so that I don't have to fix it 10 times for you? So the definition of collaboration is externally and internally is very different. On that same vein, I'll give you another example. On the engineering side, somebody who's always looking at Slack, always the first one to respond and things like that, I don't consider them as top collaborators. That means they're not doing, quiet engineering work. They're all the time fixing fires. But we do take into consideration collaboration of external, and that is just one data point. So for somebody on the product side, somebody who's a collaborator is somebody who's being honest, has the best intention, with the North Star in mind, who's comfortable, disagreeing with you, who's comfortable, saying, hey, I disagree with you, but here's why, and willing to go that extra mile, educating you and being informative. Those are the ones that we recognize from the engineering side and reward, because that is building a culture of excellence.
Thank you.
Cool. I think there is one question in the chat. And if anyone has questions for, any of the speakers as well, this is a great time to throw them in.
How do we keep systems from becoming too process-centered and adaptable to humans? That's actually a great question. I did say one thing, that too much process and too little process, both of them are hindrances. And I think it depends on the size of your team, the stage of your company, and the customers you serve, and things like that. For example, I come from non-stop systems that were built to keep NASDAQ stock exchanges alive. So stringent measures of processes were a necessary things, because we don't want to be in the Wall Street Journal the following morning. So that's one. And plus it's money, people's money and things like that. So stringent processes were required. On the other hand, having data insights late by 4 hours is not earth-shattering, right? So in those cases, you don't have to have such stringent measures. Yet you want to have guardrails so you don't make the same mistakes over and over again. But you don't have to have like a bulletproof process, right? So as a leader, you have to recognize when to have too much process and when not to have that. And it's based on the situation of the company, the people you have. I will touch upon this a little bit. Let's say you have a bunch of junior engineers, right? At that point, you do want to have process, because they're still experimenting a lot of things, and you don't want them to be experimenting on your production, and you certainly don't want them to be, using production as your test bed. So you want to have processes. But as your organization matures and you have senior staff engineers and solid managers, I think giving autonomy and the freedom of the framework for individual managers to put whatever processes that they see fit for the team is how I have accomplished, enabling the team to be self-managing. And as a senior leader, I've held on to processes that are higher level. I don't care what you do in your house, but anything that comes out of your house, make sure that it follows these processes so that you don't create chaos for the other people that are trying to get onto the train, right? So just be very, very intentional about giving autonomy to the team. I hope that answers your question, MA.